Father, I just pray today and tonight, Lord, and continuing into this week that, Lord, you would make yourself known to every one of us in greater measures. And I pray tonight that you would do just that as we unfold a small portion of the wonders that surround you. In your wonderful name, amen. Okay, I will reference some Bible verses as we go along, but I kind of want to explain why we're doing these why nights on a Sunday night. And part of the reason is many people today say that the church doesn't have the answers. Many people today say the church can't answer questions like where did we come from. The Bible, they will say, is irrelevant. And most people will say you can get varied reactions when you get to the person of Jesus. I actually happen to disagree with that. I actually happen to disagree that as the church we do have prolific answers. I happen to agree that there is strong evidence to believe not only in the existence of God, but I believe there is strong evidence to adhere to the person of Jesus Christ as being God in the flesh, as well as the authority of Scripture and the importance of church. And I'll talk about that one at the end of the month. Tonight I want to talk about why do I believe in God? And I'm saying I because I could honestly use a plethora of evidence, but it's the evidence that stands out to me, and it's the evidence that I believe points resoundingly to the existence of God. And if we think logically and if we think reasonably upon what surrounds us, it's not long before, if we do the math and have a look, something and somebody has to be behind everything that surrounds us. I want to give everybody a warning, if I can. As we work our way through this month, I remember watching a couple of documentaries. One of them was by Lee Strobel and a couple of other guys. And it's interesting that when you walk the streets and you ask people about the person of Jesus, you ask people about the evidence for the resurrection. We'll get to that one next week, the evidence for the resurrection of Christ. It's interesting how people seem that Jesus is irrelevant, that the Bible is irrelevant. And you hear answers like, you know what, if Jesus came down right now, if God gave me some kind of sign that he was real, then yeah, I would believe in him. And I want to give everybody a warning. I want to ask the question, what do we class as a sign and how much evidence do we actually need before we're left with the implication that this has to change our lives? So I'd like to go for a bit of a journey with you if I can. I have preached on this once before. It was a message that I've preached once before, which is called In the Beginning God. But I would like to just gently walk through. When I have finished, we will have a short time of Q&A. If anybody's got any questions that arise from tonight, then please feel free to ask those questions. I'd like to point to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and it says, in the beginning, God. Not in the beginning something, not in the beginning somebody. The Bible is clear that in the beginning, God. And the God is before all things, and God is the creator of all things. I would like to read you a quote from an astrophysicist by the name of Robert Jastrow. And Robert Jastrow is a confessed agnostic, which means an agnostic is like neutral ground. It's kind of like, I'm not an atheist, and I think that there must be a God, but I don't want to say which God because there's an implication when we say which God. So we sit in the middle ground. It's interesting to use the word agnostic. There's a man some of us may know by the name of Richard Dawkins. I don't know if anybody's heard of Richard Dawkins. Victor, you would have heard of Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is our recent times most antagonistic atheist. And he is a naturalist alongside of Sir Richard Attenborough. Richard? David. Potato. But he is a naturalist, and he was an atheist, and a very antagonistic atheist. And this sort of stuff doesn't make the headlines, but Richard Dawkins has recently slid across the table to agnostic. And quite often the move is we go from atheist to agnostic, and then just before we pass away, I'm a Christian, I believe in the existence of God, and we're out. Which is very interesting because Richard Dawkins' own comments are that based upon the evidence that surrounds me, something has to be out there. Somebody has to be out there. It's interesting. C.S. Lewis, last century's greatest apologist, which is somebody who gives a defence for the Christian faith, he would call himself a reluctant convert. He writes and says, I'm a reluctant convert to Christianity and to Christ because I have assessed, I have weighed, I have sifted through all of the evidence, and I am compelled to give my life and surrender my life to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. So I believe that the most recent evidence is that the universe had a beginning, and astrophysicist Robert Jastrow says that the seed of everything that has happened in the universe was planted in that first instant. That every star and every planet and every living creature in the universe came into being as a result of events that were set in motion in the moment of the cosmic explosion. The universe flashed into being, and we cannot find out what caused that to happen. Interesting. A man who passed away recently, considered to be one of the most intelligent men alive of his time, was Stephen, and his name, Hawking's. Yeah, thank you. And he is a man that holds to the Big Bang. He actually did a documentary on why he believes why we don't need God, but that didn't make a whole lot of sense either. But the problem that we have, and the problem that everybody has, is that in 1929 there was a man by the name of Edward Hubble. Everybody knows Edward Hubble? Edward Hubble is the man that invented the Hubble telescope. And when he did so, he observed that all of the universe was expanding and actually moving away from us. And this was actually the key proponent of Einstein's theory that he ran away from. Einstein ran away from this because it debunks everything, because Einstein knew that if the universe was not static, then it was not eternal, and if it's not eternal, then it had a beginning. And I'll talk about how we come to this, but if it's got a beginning, then somebody must have started it off. The universe had a beginning, and what we do discover from the advances in science today is that basically the universe is moving away from us, and if we stopped it and paused it and pressed the rewind button, everything would come back to the point where it all began. We now have telescopes that are powerful enough to see the edges of the universe and they can see the first moments of creation and the first moments that the universe came into being. I believe, the ballpark absolute evidence for the existence of God is the fact that the universe had a beginning, because if we have a Big Bang, we have a Big Banger. And I want to tell you what the leading scientists of today, when they found this, they don't deny that this is the case. Stephen Hawking's never denied that this was the case. Atheistic astrophysicists do not deny that this is the case. But Richard Dawkins, for example, is one man that said, well, the universe had a beginning, and so therefore it came into being, but they said that something must come from nothing. I'm not sure if anybody can remember, there was a Q&A here in Australia, the Q&A show. It's the most ridiculous show on television, Q&A. It is absolutely rigged. Have no fear of that. But it frustrates me no end, that show. But I did enjoy this show because Richard Dawkins was questioned about the origins of the universe, and he said that everything that is around us came from nothing. And every person in the audience broke out into laughter. That'll be Jesus. Thank you. Yes, I'll get back to him later. Sorry, I lost my train of thought now. I shouldn't have mentioned it. The Q&A with Richard Dawkins, and everybody broke into laughter. He was deeply offended. He actually got very, very angry, violently angry, to the point where you could see that he was overly frustrated. And he actually staunchly sat there and said, what is everybody laughing at? What is everybody laughing at? It is illogical to think that something at any point in time comes from nothing. A guy by the name of William Lane Craig wrote a book on what we call the Kalam cosmological argument, and I whipped these slides up quickly, so I have spelt Kalam incorrectly. But in his book, The Kalam Cosmological Argument, this is a philosophical argument for the existence of God or for the universe. It says, the argument starts with premise number one, which says, this is very simple but deeply profound, and the book that William Lane Craig writes points to how profound it is. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. In other words, what that means is, whatever it is that exists, something must have caused that to exist. If that's the case, then the universe we know began to exist. So that's the second premise. The first one is whatever exists must have a cause, and the second one is the universe began to exist. So we are left with the conclusion that the universe must have a cause. The universe that I observe, the universe that I look at, it only makes sense biblically when we look at the Bible and weigh it up and say the universe must have come from somebody. Something doesn't come from nothing. When was the last time you were sitting in your lounge room and an elephant appeared? As silly as that sounds, something doesn't come from nothing. That we have never observed in the natural universe and in our natural world, we have never observed something originating and coming from nothing. It does not make sense. We have a universe that has a beginning. We have a universe that has a beginner. I'd like to move on to the complexity that I see in our planet. Psalms 19 verse 1, a little shepherd boy by the name of David, who was a shepherd at the time when he wrote this, he writes a psalm that says, the heavens, in 19 verse 1, it says, the heavens declare the glory of God and the sky above declare his handiwork. If we just have a look at planet Earth for a moment, I don't claim to be a scientist by any means, as you can obviously tell, but it doesn't take long to logically have a look at the world around us and say, something seems to be keeping everything going. Have you ever noticed that for hundreds, if not thousands, and I will argue at some point in time, maybe even millions of years, that the sun, and I know everyone's going to say the sun doesn't rise, but have you ever noticed that the sun rises every morning and the sun sets? Have you ever noticed that the same seasons happen every single year, about the same time, to about the same degree? Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever noticed the amazing regularity in the universe? If you have, as scientists, atheistic scientists have argued, if you have a universe that is birthed from randomness, chance and chaos, how do you get such profound regularity for millions of years? Nothing has changed. The Earth has spun in exactly the same orbit. It is on exactly the same axis that it has been for millions of years. I think one of the greatest examples for the existence of God is the regularity we see in our known world. But our planet is unique. Planet Earth, if we observe all of the other planets, planet Earth is unique. Planet Earth is precisely the right size. Any smaller or any larger, we end up with planets like Neptune and Jupiter, inhabitable. Atmospheric conditions make it inhabitable for us to be here. If we're any larger, we'd be somewhat like Jupiter. Earth has just the right size to house just the right atmosphere to sustain complex, both conscious life and plant life. We don't observe that anywhere else in our universe. Our planet is just the right distance from the sun. Any closer, I know Queensland for 3 months of the year moves just that much closer to the sun, but in reality, if we were any closer to the sun or any further away, only by an nth degree, then life on Earth is not possible. Our moon is just the right size. Our moon is just the right size. It enacts just the right gravitational pull, and it sits at just the right position so that the Earth spins on the axis that it does. For those that think the Earth is flat, it's not. I've seen the photos. The Earth is round. And it spins on an axis just as it has done for millions of years. Let's take another example. 97% of the surface of this planet, 97% of the surface of this planet is salt water. But we have an amazing thing. this is something that speaks to me because in Tasmania, one thing you'll get used to is rain. So what I can't understand is it's got to be somebody profound behind all of this, because here we have 90% of the surface of the earth is salt water. And all of that salt water, I'm only speaking in generic terms now, I'm not a meteorologist either, by the way, but that water gets evaporated, right? We have a desalination process that gives us our fresh water. So this salt water is evaporated, and if we were to measure have a look at the rain that came down in Townsville. Have you ever wondered that the fact that rain actually sits in the atmosphere for a period of time? You could say that rain weighs what? You might say it weighs 200 tonnes. But we have it evaporating. It is stored in clouds and it dumps back onto the earth. We drink and reap the benefits of the fresh water. It all flows back into the sea. And lo and behold, the whole thing happens over and over again, far too often in Tasmania. We actually exist on an extraordinarily complex planet, and life balances. We're going to see more of this as we work our way along. Life balances on a razor's edge that could go either way, but it never has. Most people will say that we live in a universe that is the way it is because we're going to move towards fine-tuning in a moment. We live on a planet the way it is because of, has anybody heard of the theory called the multiverse theory? Victor, you would have done. Some people here would have. This is interesting. I think it was Jeff from Reasons to Believe. I can't remember his last name. And Jeff, this astrophysicist, he writes a book called Who's Afraid of the Multiverse? But this is actually a serious theory that has been put together by non-believing scientists. And the theory is that the universe and our planet and everything like that is the way it is because there is this dirty great big factory that is pumping out multiple universes until they get the right one. But the problem with that is that they're talking a machine that is dialing in different dials, as we'll look at in a moment, all the time, and you're still left with the same question. Who's altering the dials? Where'd the machine come from? Who's controlling all of this? We live in a very complex planet that exhibits amazing and profound regularity, which in my opinion points to the existence of God. The next one, I believe, is also another home run, and that's DNA. Charles Darwin, in his book, The Origin of Species, said, if at any point in time anybody discovers and proves the complexity that lies within the living cell, then my whole theory breaks down. You see, Charles Darwin didn't have the scientific tools that we have now to be able to examine the living cells. And he said, at if any point in time anybody is able to prove the complexity, my whole theory of evolution falls down. Can I tell you that if anybody believes in evolution, you need more faith to believe in evolution than you do. I don't know why we teach this in schools. If you unpack evolution, you need more faith to believe that we can end up the way we are now from evolution. Some years ago, they unpacked the human genome code, and when they did, they discovered something that is profound. They actually discovered that amongst each and every one of us is millions, if not trillions, of bits of information. DNA is actually information. It's a code that is different for each and every one of us, but it makes up who we are, and it is exactly what it is meant to be. It is information. It is the language, in my opinion, it is the language of God. You know, the psalmist said that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. The psalmist said that God has knitted us all together in the womb, and I think this is the greatest evidence that God is behind everything we see. If you want to see one of the greatest evidences and miracles of God, when you wake up in the morning, look in the mirror. The human body is an amazing machine. The human body and what makes up the human body, we'll have a look at a few proponents of it in a moment, but imagine with me for a moment that you're walking along the beach and you've never seen a watch before. This is an example that I've used before, and many others have as well. You've never seen a watch before, and you don't know what it's like. And as you're walking along the beach, you stub your toe on a Rolex watch, and you pick up this Rolex watch. And immediately you begin to notice that it has a band and all the links are put together nice and neatly. And on the front it has two hands and everything seems to work in some kind of pattern and some kind of regularity. And then much to your amazement, you take the back off this watch and you see all these little tiny cogs all moving in unison and everything's... Would you immediately think to yourself that this watch has come to being over thousands, if not millions of years of waves crashing onto the sand and forming this watch? What would your first thought would be? I'm sure all of us would pick up this watch and go, I wonder who made this watch. And why would we say that? Because we are looking at intelligence, we are looking at information, and we are looking at design, and it's not long before you put two and two together and go, somebody must be behind this. And when they cracked the human genome code and found all of the information and DNA, it was at that point in time, I believe, that they took the back off the Swiss watch. Somebody has to have put us together. Let's have a look at a few proponents. The human brain, I'll reel off a couple of facts. Maybe this isn't the case for all of them, but it's generally the average case. The human brain processes more than 1 million messages a second, 7 million messages a second. Mine's probably a bit slower than that. Your brain weighs all the importance of this data, filtering out the relatively unimportant. This screening function is what allows you to focus and operate effectively in your world. The brain functions differently than other organs. There is an intelligence to it, the ability to reason, to produce feelings, to dream and plan, to take action, and to relate to other people. How does that come? How do we end up with a human brain that is able to do all of that? From chance and randomness. The human eye can distinguish among 7 million different colours. It has automatic focusing and handles an astounding 1.5 million messages a second. Evolution focuses on mutation and changes from and within existing organisms, yet evolution alone does not fully explain the initial source of the eye or the brain, or the start of living organisms from non-living organisms. DNA, and I believe the human body, is the language of God. I believe God has left... it's like if you ever look at a masterpiece or a piece of art, it's like down in the bottom corner, the artist signs his name. And I believe that when we unpacked DNA and we had a look at the information, it was like God signed his name and said, this is mine. This bears my image. This one for me, the next one for me, is probably a personal one. Not everybody would attain to this, but I actually believe that morality is a huge evidence for the existence of God. What do I mean by morality? C.S. Lewis argued that the conscience reveals to us a moral law whose source cannot be found in the natural world, thus pointing to a supernatural lawgiver. Those are the words of C.S. Lewis. We all have inbuilt inside of us an intrinsic moral code. And many people might argue, well, they're just the laws of the land that we have established, but it is without dispute that you can go to faraway cultures and they hold the same kind of intrinsic moral. Yes, there is cannibalism in the world. Yes, there are those things that are evident. But even amongst their own people and amongst their own culture, they have an intrinsic moral code that is very similar to the rest of us. One of the great arguments against the existence of God, or one of the ones that is quite often raised, is, well, how can there be a God when there is so much bad and so much evil in the world? And to people that say that, I say, do you believe in God? No. Okay, but you say there's bad and there's evil in the world. Yeah, I do. Okay, well, how do you know it's bad and how do you know it's evil? You have to have a standard that you're measuring it all against. How can you say that anything's bad? That's right, we weigh it up. How can you say something's bad unless you can measure it against a standard of good? There is an objective, and by objective I mean an external, outside of us, an objective moral code that all of us naturally adhere to. And if we have a natural moral law, we must have a natural moral law giver in God. Romans 3:23 says that for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. All of us at some point in time have tipped that scale far too far to one side. We have an argument for the existence of God from morality from three premises as well. The first one, premise one, is if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise two, objective moral values and duties do exist. The conclusion is, therefore, God does exist. If God does not exist, then who is there to say that what happened in World War II is a crime? I use World War II as an example because most of us understand what happened under the Holocaust. They had we have the United Nations now because of what happened in World War II. And they had an interesting problem that after World War II, they rounded up all the ringleaders of the Nazi regime. They rounded up Himmler and Göring and a few other guys. But they had a problem when they brought them into court because what happened was they put these guys in a court of law and they were trying them for the crimes that they had committed, and all of these guys stood up and said, this was German law. We acted inside of our law in Germany. So who is there that can say to them what you did? Hitler had changed the rules. Hitler changed the law. Hitler made it law to eradicate Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and whatever else, whatever he wanted to. He created the law, and these guys acted under German law. And immediately they realised they had a problem. So what did they look to? They looked to an external code of morality. We now have the United Nations, which is seemingly supposed to act as an external, objective source of morality enforced upon others. So I believe the fact that we all have an intrinsic moral code is evidence for the existence of God. I will move on to the constants of our universe. Ecclesiastes 7:13 says that we should consider the work of God. And we have, within our universe and within our natural world, we have a series of laws and constants and so forth, and that govern everything that happens. And I want to give you an example of just one of those. There is about 11 of them, and I want to give you an example of just one of those to show you how finely tuned these constants are. The force of gravity. The force of gravity sits right on a razor's edge, where basically, to let you know how exact and precise it is, imagine taking a ruler and stretching it across the observable universe in 1-inch increments. As far as you can see with any known telescope, stretch it across the universe in 1-inch increments. The force of gravity sits on one of those inches, precisely. If you move that force of gravity 1 inch either way, we either implode or we tear apart. Gravity sits right where it needs to be, otherwise no form of conscious life is possible, either side. That's how fine-tuned the constants of our universe are. The expansion rate, the cosmological constant, which is the expansion rate of the universe, is the chances of all of these laws being right, but the cosmological constant, or the expansion rate of the universe, the scientists have given us an example of what that would be like, and they said, go out into space about the distance of the moon, take a dart, and throw the dart from the moon, and the chance of getting the cosmological constant would be the same as being able to hit a dot the size of a pinhead somewhere here on Earth. That's the chance of getting the expansion rate of the universe and the force of gravity exactly right. Either side of where they sit, the fabric of the universe tears apart or it collapses back upon itself. And they are just a couple of examples of up to 11 constants and laws within our known universe that if they are slightly off from where they are, everything we see falls apart. Recently, Jeff Zwerig, I believe his name is, Jeff Zwerig, when he came to Laguna, he's a guy from Reasons to Believe, he's an astrophysicist, and he said the greatest discovery of recent times, the one that they are still unpacking, is there is a question in the book of Job that God asks Job. God asks Job, where do I hide the darkness? And for so long, when we've looked at the universe and we've looked at the black part of the universe, everybody has said that is empty space. But they now know that that is actually something called dark matter. And it's kind of like looking at stars and planets sitting on a trampoline mat. It's actually there, it has fabric, and it is expanding at the rate of the cosmic expansion. All of these, I believe, point to the existence of God. The last one that I want to give you is in Psalms 34, the psalmist says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." You have a look over the history, at least of the last 2,000 years. And I think the greatest evidence for the existence of God and the authenticity of the person of Jesus Christ is this, that in 2,000 years, millions and millions and millions of people have put their hand up and said, Jesus has made a difference in my life. I think the greatest example, I think the greatest evidence for the existence of God is that he can be personally known and experienced today. And the fact is there are billions of people on our planet today that would gladly stand up and say, I have experienced and I have tasted of this God. And I would encourage everybody to do exactly that. That you would taste and see that this God is good. Why do I believe in the existence of God? I've given you some scientific reasons. Ones you can look up for yourself. You can research more than those if you want to. Take the time to do so if you want to. But for me personally, why do I believe in the existence of God? God to me just makes sense. When I'm sitting out on a lake fishing and I see all that is around me. I see all, you can sit there and think the insects have no place, but you soon realise that without the insects, the fish have got nothing to eat. And without the plant life that is growing all over the surface, the insects have got nothing to eat. And the fish are feeding the birds that are flying around, knocking them off. Everything has a purpose. Everything has been designed. And to me, personally, why do I believe in the existence of God? The God of the Bible just makes sense. He makes sense of what I can see in the universe. He makes sense of the fact that the universe had a beginning. He makes sense of the intrinsic moral code that is inside of each of us. He makes sense of the fine-tuning that I can see in the known world as well as the universe. God makes sense. As we have a look at the evidence, and if you were to research it more for yourself, we are all left with an implication. You see, you can't leave God on the shelf. And you may have followed Christ for many years, but we are still left with the implication and the challenge that if all of this points to the existence of God, where does that leave us today? It leaves us with an implication. I'm going to quickly pray and then we'll have a moment of Q&A. Father, I just thank you because everything around us declares your wondrous and awesome glory. I see your glory in everything around us. I see your handiwork in everything that is around us. I see your handiwork in every person that is around us. Father, I pray that you would continue to make yourself gloriously and profoundly known to every person in this room and outside of this room. In Jesus' name, amen.